Good morning. It's a beautiful day if you're a duck. It's interesting how that rain can be that cold and not be frozen. Man, it's cold. Glad you're here. We're going to continue the lessons that Eddie started a couple weeks ago, talking about elders and their duties and qualifications and all that sort of stuff. And I'm going to do the next three to kind of wind it up before the meeting starts. If you did not pick up an outline out front, raise your hand and Jerry will make sure you got one. I'm kind of old school. I like to do the outlines also because it gives you a place to take some notes if you want to, or make some comments to look at later on. Before we get started today, Bill, would you lead us in prayer, please? Amen. There's not a single role in the Lord's church that's more important or necessary than that of an elder. When Paul and Barnabas returned to the congregations that they had established, had recently established, they appointed elders in every church. They didn't appoint ministers, they didn't appoint deacons. They felt that elders were more important. And that's the truth. The practice of ordaining elders in each congregation would continue throughout Paul's life. And that, the word ordaining to our denominational friends means some sort of a big ceremony where you go through, you get ordained as a preacher or whatever. But ordained, it just means you're appointed for a special job. So they were appointing these elders in every congregation. Paul commanded Titus to ordain elders in every city, and offers him in Titus 1:5 a list of qualities that those men ought to possess. We won't be talking about them particularly today, but we will in the lessons to come. We believe and can affirm that Paul's teaching about the elders are important is true. But who are they and what do they do? There are three terms for the office used in the New Testament to help us answer these questions. And the word office is not used exactly right there. I believe the original Greek is translated to mean a goal to serve or a work. But we use the term office just in just because it's easy to speak of it that way. the term elder was associated with the leadership in the Jerusalem church, making it the earliest word used for that office in the New Testament. It is also the most frequently occurring. The book of Acts uses it 10 times. In Acts 11:30, 14:23, and all those others I have listed for you there. I'm not going to go through every one of those individually. I'm not sure how the time's going to work today, so I'm not going to go through those individually, but if you read those and check on those, you'll find that the elders, particularly the elders at Jerusalem, were pretty heavily involved with the apostles and with working on church problems, and particularly the problem that some were preaching circumcision, that you had to be circumcised even if you're not a Jew to be a Christian. But the elders and the apostles worked together on solving that question and issued a joint letter from Jerusalem to the other congregations. So they were involved early on in the church and continue to be. There are three primary questions that can be asked about the word elder as it applies to the office of church leadership. One is, where did the elder come from? Where did that term come from? Secondly, how old does a man need to be considered for eldership? And what light does this term elder shed on that office? So where does the term elder come from? Well, for centuries, from the earliest parts of civilization, and also dating back particularly to the time of Moses, the Israelites recognized the council of elders. You remember those verses in Exodus list times that Moses called the elders of the children of Israel together. We also know that the pagan societies and most other civilizations in that time, both ancient, Jewish and pagan, recognized and utilized a council of elders to run their civilization for them. So it's highly likely that the people living in the ancient Mediterranean area were used to being led by a community of elders. Therefore, it would have been relatively easy for them to understand that term and for that and to justify an office with men bearing that title in the early church. So, how old must an elder be? How young is too young? In the modern church, men have been appointed in their 30s. Other congregations will not appoint a man until he reaches his 50s. What age does the word elder indicate in its original context? In the New Testament and in other ancient Greek writings, the term elder is often used when it's contrasted with the term younger in a general sense. It's possible that the New Testament authors divide adulthood into two seasons, youth and old age. Perhaps a young man would be perhaps 20 to 40 years old, and an older man maybe 40 and older. For example, Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12, let no man despise thy youth. Timothy at that time would have been probably 21 to 28 years old, and when Paul speaks of elders, he would have been thinking of men probably 40 or 50 years old. Now, obviously, there's no specific number given for that, and there are things to be considered more than just a number. Different men mature at different speeds, are able to learn and have experiences necessary to be an elder at different times during their life. So it's reasonable to conclude that an elder in the New Testament could not be and would not be identified purely by age as a man no younger than his mid-40s. But age is not the only and perhaps not the primary factor or qualification for an elder. So what light does the word elder itself shed on that office? As we've said, the term elder has associations with age, but that word is not about age alone. Paul makes it clear in his list of qualities that he sent to Titus in Titus 1, 6 through 9, that age is not the primary requirement for the man who holds the office. There's a whole list of those qualifications, and we won't talk about them much individually today, but we will in future lessons. Just as important to age is the wisdom that a man has learned in his life. There are some, for instance, the Roman Emperor Tiberius was, even when he was still a young man, he was called the elder because out of respect for his great wisdom. There was a Roman writer named Cicero who said, "For just as I approve of the young man in whom there is a touch of youth, touch of age, so I approve of the old man in whom there is some flavor of youth. He who strives thus to mingle youthfulness and age may grow old in body, but old in spirit he will never be." Job declared in Job 12:12, "With aged men is wisdom, and in length of days understanding." And Solomon said, "Better is a poor and wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished." These statements are enough to prove that an elder in the church is more than an older man. An elder is one who's proven himself wise. So the second term used for elder is bishop. Bishop in the New Testament is used to describe the office of the elder. The term literally means supervisor or overseer. We may tend to think of a supervisor or overseer as a cold, authoritarian figure, but the term here conveys the warmth of looking after people and things. That's an excellent definition of what it means to be a bishop. In the church, those men are appointed to look after the needs of the congregation. Unlike the term elder, the word bishop has no association with age, but it still shares a biblical background in the Greek Old Testament. The term was used to refer to officials appointed in the Israelite military to look after others in the military, and also to look after the temple. The temple officials were not priests, but servants appointed by the priest to guard, supervise, and care for the house of God. unlike the word elder, which does not apply to an office per se, the term bishop suggests an officially appointed position of recognized responsibility. It's interesting to know that the role of an apostle was not a self-perpetuating thing. It was not a indefinite succession of folks. It may be realized then that the apostles would at some point disappear. The book of Acts assigns a role of increasing importance to the elders of the Jerusalem church, as we talked about before, and to more or less, the apostles were in charge of the whole church when it started, and as they appointed elders, then the elders became the leaders and in charge of their individual congregations. And that's a point that I think we all understand. This congregation of the Lord's church is totally independent. We don't answer to any higher authority here on earth. We're not part of some organization where they send us instructions as to how to conduct our worship service or instructions about what to preach or anything else. We are a totally independent body. Now, that does not mean that we don't sometimes cooperate with other churches in some kind of works. The work that we do in the Philippines is an excellent example. There are several churches outside this congregation that contribute to that work. So we cooperate and work, but we're not subject to, nor tied to, nor responsible to any other congregation. So the last term is shepherd. So if bishop is an official term, shepherd is a relational word. We seem to be living in a relational age in which formality and authority have been either done away with or redefined. Respect is not assigned, but earned. And even when it's earned, it need not be acknowledged publicly. In an age of informality, there's no surprise that many modern churches refer to their leaders as shepherds rather than elders or bishops. Doubtless they do this to break down the barriers between the congregation and its leadership and to invite the warmth of a family relationship. It's certainly not a bad thing. The first century churches, however, did not typically refer to their leaders as shepherds. Shepherd is almost always used as a verb in reference to church leadership. In other words, the terms elder and bishop describe who the men are and the role that they occupy. Shepherd describes what they do. Paul commands the Ephesian elders, therefore take heed of yourselves and to all the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God which he purchased with his own blood. In Acts 20:28. In this context, Paul refers to the elders as overseers, but commands them to shepherd as an action. Likewise, Peter likewise advises the elders of the church in 1 Peter 5:1 to shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. Notice again, we have the nouns, and I think this is a really important part. We have the nouns, elder and overseer, and we have the verb, shepherd. So if you all remember little from your English, which is what I do, a noun is a person, place, or thing, but a verb indicates action. So it's important for us to realize that the description of the work of the elder and the bishop come to fruition in the work of the shepherd of the church. It seems that the scripture is trying to teach a lesson here. A man can become an elder simply by staying alive long enough, simply by being old enough. A man can be appointed a bishop whether he supervises or not. That term essentially refers to an office. But men can only become shepherds when they exercise the art of shepherding. One cannot be appointed a shepherd any more than one can be appointed a fisherman. You become a fisherman when you fish, and you become a shepherd when you shepherd the flock. The term shepherd here implies a continual activity, knowing and patrolling among the sheep, protecting them from threats and consoling them when hurt. And this may be the key statement of the whole lesson. The real work of church leaders comes in the shepherding field. The shepherding of the congregation is the real work of the eldership. As the reader well knows, some religious traditions regard the word elder, bishop, and shepherd as describing different offices in the church. However, that's not how they were originally used, not how they were intended. They were originally intended to refer to one office. In Acts 20, as Paul is saying his goodbyes to the leaders of the Ephesian church, he uses all three terms, at least in the original Greek, to refer to these men in Acts 20:17 and 28. Peter does the same thing, 1 Peter 5:1-2. These terms are not synonyms, and if I remember right, that means they don't mean the same thing. The word elder helps to identify men with wisdom and experience. The word bishop helps us recognize the official position with authority to look after and care for the church. Finally, the word shepherd is used almost exclusively to describe the work church leaders do, not the title they have, and helps us to understand our leaders feed, nourish, protect, and lead us closer to the Lord. Now, I think you all know a little bit about how we work as an eldership here, the four of us, me and Hugh and Brother Glenn and Brother Allen. We have a really strong, close relationship. We talk during the week sometimes, or text. We meet every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock to talk about the work and the needs of the congregation here. And there are some times that when we disagree about some things, never about the plan of salvation or anything important like that. But there are times that we have different opinions about different things, and we sit back there and we talk them out. It's what one of my engineering colleagues used to refer to as it's a safe zone. We can talk about anything we need to talk about. Nobody gets offended. Nobody gets their feelings hurt. We express what we think and we talk it out, and we never leave an issue divided. We may leave that meeting. We may not decide it all in one meeting. We may take us several meetings to talk about it and to decide what's what and where's where. But we never leave an issue divided. When we come out of that room with the issue solved, we're together. It's the only way that we've ever operated. The only way the eldership here, as far as I know, has ever operated. Hugh and I were fortunate enough to come in, and this year, you realize this year is 30 years that we've been doing this? 30 years that Hugh and I have been privileged to serve this congregation here. 30 years, that's a long time. But we were privileged to come in with a group of really sound and smart elders. Brother Robert was in that group. Brother Ian Sanford was in that group. John Robert McGee was in that group. We had the opportunity to sit at the feet of those guys and learn a great deal about what an eldership did and what they needed to do and how to operate. Glenn and Alan were not as fortunate. They only had mostly Hugh and I to learn from, and that was dangerous, but that's a whole different subject. But I want you all to know more than anything else that we all love and care for each other, and that while we may disagree on minor points, we never disagree on anything that's important to our souls or to the souls of this congregation. I think back about, I don't know which novel it was. I'm sure somebody knows about it. The guy said it was the best of times and the worst of times. That's the way I think about the job and the privilege of serving as an elder. It's the best of times, and it can be the worst of times. But it's a position that we all want to do, and that's one of the qualifications we'll talk about. You gotta want to do it. You got a desire to do it, to be able to do a good job with it. So next week we'll get a little bit more into the qualifications for an elder, the elder or bishop, and talk a little bit. And then the week after that, we'll talk more about the shepherding work, the work that we do in the details. Thank you for your attention. It's about time for the bell, I think. Let me encourage you, if you have some questions as we go along, don't ask them to me. Write them down, and we will talk about them as a group, which we do about everything, so that we have a good, consistent answer for you that everybody agrees on. But I'm not going to stand up here and answer them individually. but we'll be glad to address any questions you have if you write them down for us and give us time to study them. Thank you again for your attention.